Hi, everybody. So yes, I'm here to do the introduction for Josh and Raquel from CERC. And I'll just mention that I think that League of Women Voters of Boulder County has been a member of CERC for about 5 years. Not sure exactly how long. I've spent quite a bit of time at some of their meetings. They have northern regional meetings, I think twice a year or once a year or something like that. I've been to quite a few of those. I was at an immigration march in September, which was just amazing. I mean, this is the whole thing about working with CERC, is you learn about all the stories, and you just can't help but have empathy for the people who are persevering for decades trying to get their rights. So I've always been impressed with CERC with their democratic processes and their success in the legislature. They always focus on usually 2 bills per year, and sometimes it takes more than 1 or 2 or 3 years to get something finally passed, but it's very, very effective, I think. And so I've been proud to be working with them. So I guess I'm not sure who's going to be doing the presenting, but Josh is our North regional organizer. So he kind of is over all of us that are in the North area. And then Raquel is the political manager, and she quite often shepherds these things through the legislature and gathers support from organizations and from legislators and all that type of stuff. So welcome to Josh and Raquel.
Thanks, Peggy, for the introduction. I'm going to kick us off, and I'll go ahead and share my screen, and then Raquel's going to jump in for the bulk of the presentation after that. So yeah, as Peggy said, can everyone see the screen, I guess, first? Okay, cool. As Peggy said, my name's Josh. I live in Longmont, Colorado, and I've been the North Regional Organizer at CERC for the last 2.5 years. And I just want to start out saying too that we really appreciate all of y'all being here, and hope that no one was too impacted by the fire. And for any of you that were impacted, we'd love to know how we can support you. And we've also been trying to figure out how we can best support our immigrant community, and making sure that people that are undocumented or a part of mixed status families know that they still have access to the supports that are out there. And so if y'all know the immigrant folks that were impacted by the fires, please let us know too how we can support them. And I don't know if this is on y'all's mind, but I've been hearing a lot of questions from community members wanting to know how they can support people of color and immigrants that were impacted by the fires. And so I'm going to put in the chat this running document that I have of individual fundraising campaigns I've seen from people that are Black, Indigenous, people of color, and immigrants. So feel free to check that out if you feel moved to. So yeah, I'm going to give y'all a quick overview of what CERC is, and then Raquel will tell us more about the state campaigns that we have this year. And so this may be repetitive for some of you, but CERC is a coalition of about 90 organizations in the state. It includes grassroots immigrant groups, faith communities, labor unions, youth organizations, and so many nonprofits, including the League of Women Voters. And CERC achieves its mission through civic engagement, through public education, and through advocacy. And so I'm going to give you all a quick rundown of what some of those things are that we do, just so that you know. Actually, first, here's a few. This is most of the organizations in Boulder County that are part of CERC. So there's a really strong representation in Boulder County. And then around the state, you can see these pinpoints where we have members. So it's pretty cool that we have representation from a lot of the rural areas of the state too. Okay, so a few of the things that we do at CERC are know your rights presentations for community to know, what are your rights with law enforcement and with ICE? What is the difference between those two situations? We do a lot of support with folks that are trying to get their driver's license if they're undocumented or have a temporary status, because the process is more tedious and there's more steps. And so we help with that navigation. We have a legal services team that supports people with DACA renewal applications and applications for citizenship. And then throughout the years, we've done a lot of support too for people who find themselves in situations where they're fighting their own deportation case or where they've had an interaction with ICE. And so that's through our DOCU team, and then the Colorado Rapid Response Network, whose acronym is CORN with 2 R's. And so this is a hotline that people can call anytime they've had an interaction with ICE that they want support on, or if they're witnessing a raid going on in the present moment, they can call this number and we'll send out trained volunteers to confirm what's happening, to be there to legally observe the situation. And so I really think, though, the heart of our work at CIRC is around advocacy for policies in the state and making our state more equitable and more accessible for immigrants. And so, so we're always working on federal immigration reform, making sure that people are advocating for a pathway to citizenship, which we still have not achieved, but hopefully in the near future that'll be possible. And also advocating for ICE not over policing our communities. And then in the state of Colorado, some of the things that we've achieved over the years include passing driver's licenses for people that are undocumented, making sure that undocumented folks have in-state tuition if they've been living in our communities, ending the police and ICE collaboration so that people know they can trust law enforcement to do its job for safety, and that they won't be handed over to ICE. And then this last year, our coalition was able to pass a data privacy law to protect people's data so that when they get their driver's license, they don't have to fear that information being handed over to ICE, as well as creating a legal defense fund to make sure that people in Colorado who are fighting their immigration cases can get a lawyer, since there's no public attorney or defender system in immigration court. This fund is going to help make that possible. And so we're starting off with a drop in the bucket, but the hope is in the years to continue to grow that fund so that one day we can ensure that everyone in the state of Colorado is represented. So that was a quick overview. Sorry that I kind of went through that really fast, but we want to make sure we can touch on a lot this morning and have time for some questions. So I'm going to pass it over to Raquel now to talk about what's happening this year and what we're working on.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. Can y'all hear me okay? Awesome. Apologies for being out in a mountain town right now. I'm with a snowboarding group and we're taking our kids up today to get their passes for the first time, but really excited to be with y'all. My name is Raquel Arellano and I'm the policy manager with CIRC. And just a quick background, I have a lot of love for Boulder. My mom, I got into this work because I come from a family of immigrants. My mom's from Mexico, and her first and longest job she had was at CU for 35 years as a janitor, and have a lot of love for the area. Okay, so we're gonna go into our policy process and just briefly to show y'all how we get to choose our top priorities, because I feel like it's really important and a big testament to the work that we do and our members across the state, like League of Women Voters. So this is just a quick snapshot of what our process looks like. Peggy kind of alluded to it, but all of the things that we work on come from our members. And that first step, where our members submit policy proposals, and then they're vetted through every single region. Every region chooses their top 4 policies of a long list of options. And then we get to the statewide assembly, where all of our members across the state engage with each other, ask really meaningful questions, and choose ultimately 2 top priorities. It's a very lengthy process. It takes about 2 to 3 months. And that's how we got to the priorities that we're working on right now. And Josh, if you could go to the next slide. Okay, so our big legislative priority this year, we only have one legislative goal, is to expand Medicaid access and CHIP for undocumented students or undocumented youth, ages 0 through 19. And we're also focusing on implementing Senate Bill 131, which is the data privacy bill we passed last year, and Senate Bill 251, which is a driver's license bill that was passed in 2013. And I think what's really meaningful about those two priorities is, they were elevated across the state. And this is something that directly impacted members and allies across the state. That was really important for us to focus on. And for healthcare, the campaign to expand healthcare access was one that was really elevated in every single region. And I think that's something that and I've been with CERC for 3 years, and it's the first time I've seen a priority carry so much weight. I think it's a telling of the moment that we're in right now. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to dive into each of the campaigns, and we'll have time for questions at the end, but feel free to put them in the chat as we present. As y'all may or may not know, there is a huge problem in equity and access to healthcare in our country. And that problem is exemplified exacerbated if you are an immigrant, whether you're undocumented or even immigrants who are documented have oftentimes a 5-year bar before they're able to get access to critical services like Medicaid and other forms of healthcare. And also another challenge here is that for pregnant people, if they are undocumented, they can get emergency Medicaid right, for the birth of the child. But oftentimes, unless your state has gone out of its way to affirmatively create access, pregnant people who are undocumented can't get care throughout the pregnancy. So there's no access to prenatal care unless they're going through community clinics or private care. And even private care is incredibly hard to access if you're undocumented in Colorado. There will be a program created in 2023, thanks to one of the big bills that passed last year, creating the public option. We're now going to have the ability for undocumented folks to buy into private insurance and to access support from this enterprise, which is going to offer some discounted costs to care or support financially for families that can't afford care. But we know this is a really big issue because our immigrant community oftentimes works in industries where they don't get coverage from their employers. That's a good question. I'm blanking on what CHIP stands for right now. Josh, do you remember what the acronym stands for?
No, not off the top of my head.
But yeah, it's a really big deal because undocumented immigrants in general, or immigrants in general, often are working in industries that they're usually lower wage and they don't provide access to healthcare provided by their employer oftentimes. And so what we see is the gap in insurance. Oh, thanks, Elizabeth. The gap in insurance is amplified for undocumented children. So they're the most of all of children who are uninsured. Undocumented student or kids are 31% likely to be uninsured of the entire uninsured population of kids. And we see this as the next step to actually closing that gap for mixed status families too, right? Families that might have 1 or 2 children who have different mixed or immigration statuses. Oftentimes families will have maybe 1 child who was born here and does qualify for Medicaid and CHIP already, but another child who doesn't. And so they might forego care because they're afraid of, things like public charge and afraid that applying for the care, even if their child qualifies for it, will get them into problems with immigration down the line. Next slide, Josh. Okay, I think I mentioned a little bit of this, but we have a ton of laws on the books federally. Luckily, last year, we just repealed House Bill 1023, which was a bill that banned access to some state funded services and made it really hard to pass local programs. That was just repealed last year. That was something that was created in 2013. But there's still a lot of reasons why immigrant families choose not to get care, right? And a lot of it, I think, has to stem from fears of immigration consequences and the fact that our country has very intentionally, for the past several decades, made it incredibly hard for immigrants to access the resources they need. And I think another reason why this is so impactful to do, right, is that we know research shows how meaningful it is to invest early on in children, and for that's from pregnancy into childhood, and the impacts of having the care that you need and be able to go to the doctor when you need to go to are profound, right? This has implications for success in school, future careers, and just like a person's overall ability to be healthy and to thrive through getting the quality care that they need early on in their life, and being able to identify health challenges earlier on instead of when they're at emergency state, right? Which is currently the only thing that undocumented immigrants can get is emergency Medicaid. Next slide. So we are really excited to be working with Representative Gonzalez Gutierrez, and I didn't update my slides in time, but we just found out we're also working with Representative McCluskey, and we are still looking for our Senate sponsors, but we're running a bill this year to expand that access to Medicaid and CHIP for youth and also for pregnant people. And so what the bill would do is expand coverage to pregnant folks, regardless of immigration status. They would get access to Medicaid. For kids 0 through 19, it would expand access to Medicaid and CHIP. That way, we chose both programs because we think it'll make it easier for families when they register to have, if all their kids qualify for both, then all their kids can do both, regardless of immigration status, instead of having some children qualify for certain programs based on their immigration status and others not. And another exciting thing that this bill will do is expand the enrollment period for pregnant people, essentially allowing somebody to enroll in Medicaid if they didn't qualify before in a new enrollment period based on their pregnancy, because we know that the enrollment period doesn't align necessarily with when you might be experiencing your first pregnancy or any pregnancy. Next slide. Okay, all right. Like I said, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. The next bill that it's not a bill, but the next campaign we're focused on is implementing our data privacy bill and the driver's license bill. Like I said, the driver's license bill was passed in 2013, but there still remain a lot of pretty big problems with the program. Essentially, it is certainly not as accessible as your standard license. There's been issues with certain DMVs, in the way staff are trained, and folks getting turned away really for very small infractions or for not having certain documents. And so we've been working with the DMV over the years to try and make sure the program is actually as accessible as a normal license. But there's still a ways to go. So we're working closely and creating work plans with the DMV and the Department of Revenue to actually create the steps it would take to make this a program that is just as easy to get as a normal license, and not one. Currently, we actually, we train organizations and run workshops to help people navigate the system because it is that complicated. So we're hoping to get away from that system where it would function just like a regular license, and that the DMV would be taking on the bulk of the work without the need for so much hands-on support for folks. And these are all statewide campaigns. Josh is going to get into the federal stuff in just a moment. And the last thing is we're focusing on implementing the data privacy bill we passed last year. That bill came out of a open records request we had done and realized that there was some information sharing happening between the DMV and the DMV Fraud Investigation Unit and ICE. And so we worked really closely with the governor's office and with the DMV to create a data privacy law last year, Senate Bill 131 at the state level. And what that bill does, amongst several things, is It protects, it creates new user agreements to protect our databases so that ICE, but also third-party agencies that oftentimes will buy information from our DMV to sell to ICE or other law enforcement, to make it so that they cannot use or sell that information for immigration enforcement purposes, because we think that's a disservice to the program created and creates a lot of mistrust for our community within, with their trust in our government and being able to access programs, which is already a tenuous relationship as is. So we're focused on making sure that that bill gets fully implemented and making sure that state employees are really aware and trained and understand what it means that they are not allowed to share information with ICE. Okay, next slide. Okay, all right, take it away, Josh. I'll be looking in the chat for questions, but we'll do questions at the end.
Yeah, do you want to address the last question that was asked in the chat before I continue? I don't know if you have an answer to that.
The one, how do our state legislators follow up and ensure that bills passed or implemented? That's a great question about implementation, right, Josh? That's the question.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, I feel like legislators have so much on their plate, focusing on, getting ready for the new session. They are incredibly helpful with implementation. Like Senator Moreno helped pass the driver's license program in 2013. And to this day, he's been one of our biggest allies when it comes to, holding the DMV accountable or like working with stakeholders who might need an extra nudge from somebody like the senator. But I would say, I think oftentimes implementation falls on the organizations and the coalitions that pass these efforts, because it's one thing to pass something, but it's, not an equal amount of work, but definitely a sizable amount of work to make sure the community is aware of the bill, especially if it pertains to new rights afforded to people, and to make sure that it is implemented really well, right? And that the money allocated to the program is like going where it needs to go, and that there aren't any, or that if and when there are challenges with how implementation is going, that we address those. Because I think, most of these bills, it would be foolhardy to think that you wouldn't need to come back and be focused on implementation. I think oftentimes that's a really important step.
Thanks, Raquel. So I wanted to give y'all some updates too on what's happening with federal immigration reform. I think many of us were really excited with this new administration and with the potential to have something significant pass. It's been since the mid 80s under the Reagan presidency that there was an affirmative immigration reform where millions of people were able to legalize. And so it's, long overdue. And so quick overview is, I think many of y'all are aware of this, but we'll say anyways, that one of the challenges we've run into this year is the filibuster. Because in the Senate, we don't just need, 51 votes. We don't just need the majority to pass anything. We actually need 60, because unless you have those 60 votes, a filibuster would thwart any efforts to pass legislation. And so there were a handful of bills. There's 4 main bills actually that were introduced this spring that would give some groups of people a pathway to citizenship. And so one bill focused on farm workers, one bill focused on essential workers. There's another bill that looked at people with DACA and with TPS. And then the Biden bill was the most inclusive and would create a pathway to citizenship for, I think, at least 8 million people. But all these bills really are stalled because of the filibuster in the Senate. And so over the last few months, immigration rights groups have really been looking at the Build Back Better bill as our hope to pass immigration reform, because it's a reconciliation bill. We don't need 60 votes, we just need the majority. But there's definitely been hangups with that too. And so there's been a lot of debate around whether some kind of immigration policy can be included in that, because all the policies in the reconciliation bill have to do with our budget. Let me know if there's a question that I should stop and answer. Otherwise, I'll check out the chat when I finish talking. The problem, yeah, and so there's been a lot of arguments for why immigration, is related to our budget. Obviously, has huge implications in the fact that millions of undocumented people, are essential workers and allow this economy to continue. And legalization provides more opportunities for people to be entrepreneurs, start their own businesses, to really flourish. And that's an argument that Representative Joe Neguse and a lot of other legislators have been making. However, there's someone in the Senate, there's a role in the Senate parliamentarian, which is an unelected position filled by an attorney that really advises the Senate on what can be done or can't be done. And so this person has recommended that, a pathway to citizenship through including these bills that were introduced in the spring really isn't, in her words, hasn't, it's not enough of a budget issue to be included in reconciliation. And she thinks that it's a more substantial policy that needs to be passed on its own outside of reconciliation. And so because of that, advice, our Congress has pivoted to proposing a new status called parole in place, which is more or less like DACA, but would last 5 years, giving people work authorization and protections from deportation. And the thought is that would, depending on when the date is that they set in terms of how long people had to be in the country to get that would support at least 5 million people with having a temporary status. But just like DACA, that would have no pathway to citizenship. And so our coalition, members of our steering committee who are directly impacted by this issue have been really outspoken saying, this is not enough. We are fighting for citizenship and we don't want to create a second class of residents in the United States, right, that don't have a pathway to citizenship and a pathway forward. And so our coalition is continuing to advocate for this pathway to citizenship. And what we're really asking our legislators to do right now is to overrule the guidance that the Senate parliamentarian has given, because her advice is not legally binding. And so we're asking our legislators to really have a backbone on this issue and to realize the importance that this will have for people now and for generations to come. And so I'll go ahead and put in the chat a link to our email campaign and our call script if people want to take a few minutes to be able to reach out to our senators and share this. Because really every time that we're able to advocate for this issue, every voice counts. Sometimes, I don't know if y'all feel this way, but sometimes I'm like, I don't know if they're actually listening to me. But our friend Erica Blum, who used to work for CERC and now works in the office of Representative Joe Neguse, has shared again and again that the legislative offices, the congressional offices do take tallies on a lot of these things, and they really do try to listen to constituents. So the more we can put this on their radar, the better. So we're still looking to see what will happen with passing pathway to citizenship for people. And at the same time, our coalition and a number of immigrant rights organizations across the country are starting to look at what we can do outside of policy to push the Biden administration on immigration enforcement. So you all may know this, in Biden's first day in office, in this first week, there was a lot of things that he said that were really promising about changing the way immigrants in our country are treated. But unfortunately, since that time, a lot of the policies that the Biden administration has enacted are no different than the Trump administration and previous presidential administrations. And so we continue to incarcerate immigrants in detention centers at, higher numbers than ever, and we continue to use a lot of the same practices at the border and throughout the country that really are not respecting and giving dignity to our immigrant population. So we're hoping that through public pressure and through organizing, that a lot of those issues can be addressed. And I think with that, I'll share the link to the slideshow with y'all, but this is my contact information. If any of y'all want to reach out with further questions or for things in the future. And I'll go ahead and stop sharing and check the chat to see if there's any questions. But also, if anyone has questions, feel free to come off mute and ask them out loud.
So Afton, you had a question. Do you want to just verbally share that with them to get an answer? You want to unmute yourself?
Okay. Well, I was just concerned about this being a legal path. In other words, we've had so many undocumented migrants. I'm from Oregon originally. And so we had that problem there. And how are these people encouraged and put on the pathway to legally seek citizenship? Often it is done before they come into our country. That's my question.
Yeah, let me see if
Okay.
I'll go ahead and attempt to respond to that. And then if I don't.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. I'd like to know.
Yeah, so for people so United Nations gives or designates, certain countries as areas where there's like a problem where people can be designated as refugees, and the United States then accepts refugees, where that whole process happens before people arrive to the country. So when people get here, they already have that refugee status.
Right. I'm aware of it because I work in Geneva, Switzerland.
Okay.
At the UN. Okay.
So when it comes to asylees, though, people do not get status until they're not able to apply for asylum until they're actually in the country. And so for a lot of countries that we have asylees coming from, including Central America, there's no way for them to apply ahead of time. They actually have to be on US soil to apply for asylum. And for a lot of our immigrant community, there really is no pathway for them to apply for citizenship either. And so they come here without status. I have friends that have been waiting since the late 90s to apply for a status through a parent, a sibling, or a relative who was already a US citizen. And so the backlog is tremendous. And then for people that don't have those, yeah.
Okay, so these people you were speaking about today are illegal. They're not on already a pathway to gain citizenship. I'm just trying to get it clarified because I'm new to Colorado.
Yes, yeah. So we prefer to use the term undocumented, just because it's more dignifying than saying illegal. But
Okay,
the people
documented. Okay.
Yeah, the people we're talking about are people that don't have status, and
Okay.
many of whom have been in our communities and our neighbors that have been here for decades. And so it's about getting them a pathway, because right now there is no pathway for them.
I see.
Afton, you also
I'm
had,
just trying to. Yeah.
I'm sorry. You also had a question. I
Yeah.
think what you were asking was
Go ahead.
the person with the driver's license. We've now made it legal for them to get a driver's license, but the issue of insurance and paying
Right.
that insurance is an issue for many of us. So are
Right.
there anything happening to help them with the insurance side of it? Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
and that's what our question was, part of it. Thank you for clarifying that.
I can speak a little bit to that. Josh, feel free to jump in. I think that was a major selling point of, for some, because we actually got a lot of bipartisan support on the driver's license in 2013, was that it actually really does increase insurance rates, because if you don't have a license, you can't get insurance. And so you need a
Yeah.
license in order to be able to purchase insurance to begin with. And so I think we've seen, fortunately, the positive effects of having a license leading to more folks being able to be insured on the roads.
Okay, so you're saying that these people are helped to get insurance? I'm not clear what you're saying. I'm sorry, your math.
No, I was saying, we don't necessarily provide that help to get insurance.
Okay.
But just like the fact of folks having licenses has made a pretty big difference in the rate of uninsured drivers in Colorado. It's dropped that rate a lot because people can now buy private insurance or car insurance because they have a license. But yeah, unfortunately, we don't provide those services. But I know a lot of our partners help people, and we do help people get their license, but we don't typically do the second step of the insurance.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know, Josh, if you know
Thank
any
you for
organizations
clarifying.
that do. Yeah.
Peggy, do you want to expand on the question that Deborah Hayes had on, as a CERC member, how does LWVBC work with and support CERC, and what else can the Boulder League do?
Yeah, so last year, I was able to, well, I was on the Legislative Action Committee for the league at the state level. And I'm also the advocacy chair for the Women's Collaborative of Boulder County, which is 15 organizations. And I got both of those to support the CERC priorities last year. And to testify in favor, and to, in the case of the Women's Collaborative, we sent a letter to all of our Boulder County legislators saying that our collaborative supported those two bills, along with some other ones. But anyway, so, and then I think just, I don't know, I don't feel like I contribute much to CERC. I feel like I learn more from them than they give to me. You know, supporting as far as, I mean, we've written letters to the editor about DACA, and I participated in some Zoom meetings with a group of people who were DACA recipients, and they were anxiously awaiting the verdict from the Supreme Court. I think that was in 2020. And they were getting ready to provide mental health support because it was so stressful for all these people. And I could just see the pain in their faces. And it was just so moving to me to see the impact it was having on their lives. So I feel like they impact me much more than the league does impact them, but I do try to help out wherever we can. So.
Peggy, I also assume that as this legislation moves forward, that you know, we'll be sharing action alerts that all league members can get behind, contacting their representatives to help pass this at the state level.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And of course, we can all contact our senators about the, the filibuster and the Build Back Better, and can we include immigration reform in their pathway to citizenship. You know, these people, there's been no immigration legislation in 35 years at the federal level. It's just pathetic.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'll just chime in to add that in the next few weeks, we should have a sign-on for organizations up to support the healthcare campaign, expanding Medicaid. So we'll keep y'all posted on that. And then if anyone's particularly passionate about this issue and has more of a personal connection to it, we'll also be meeting with our state legislators. And so there may be an opportunity to join one of those meetings. And then just really doing the work that y'all are already doing to continue to educate yourselves and talking with your community. That goes so far. And I love what Peggy was saying about learning from our immigrant neighbors, because I think that's a huge perspective too, right? As so many people in our community think this is about helping someone in need, and really it's about, you know, being friends with people and being in solidarity and having relationships. And so Peggy's been a tremendous example of what that relationship should look like and how our community is stronger together.
Great. Okay, Raquel and
Speaking.
Josh, we thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Elizabeth, do you want to
Just
go
wanted
ahead?
to add in one thing really quickly. Again, appreciation, obviously, for Circle. I'll do that in just a minute. To Peggy and other league members, Rosana, Longo Better, Jackie, Alderete, Hannah Rain Crow have all just more folks for sure, but for sure recently kind of been helping represent league in circ spaces. And I do think there are some ways that we can continue to do better in terms of really kind of streamlining communication from circ back to our members, and knowing that we do have some, kind of a small but mighty core group who really continue to keep those connections really strong with Josh and with Raquel and with others. And that if any of you are really interested in helping do that, it doesn't need to be all of us, but making sure that we're really represented there, and that we have folks who, again, in addition to Peggy, can really look at what the circ positions are, not only kind of represent league in that space, but also just make sure that we do have alignment with our league positions. Deborah, as you noted in the chat, we've got a long history of advocacy on multiple immigration issues, but it's our work as league members just to make sure that that alignment is there, and that we know that we're on solid ground in terms of our advocacy policy positions. One other thing I just wanted to mention, because I don't think many league members are aware of this, is that one of the other kind of specific actions, again, small but significant, is that league has made a donation to support filing fees for that equal the amount that for DACA recipient. I'm stumbling over my words, but we've made a contribution as an organization to that effort, just to make sure that we're doing, again, as another part in really helping make sure that folks have what they need in order to, be as members of this community as fully as possible while we continue to work on that pathway. With that, I just wanted to add in there. Hopefully that's helpful, and thank you.
Great. So Josh, Raquel, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it. You can stick around. We're just going to go into some small breakout groups just to kind of do some socialization, see how folks are doing after the Marshall Fire and the aftermath of that. So thank you again for coming today. We appreciate it so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Now I'm going to turn to Lydia. She's going to get us into